Welcome to the second day of the Wake Forest Symposium on Aging Reimagined. My name's Daniel Kim Shapiro. I'm one of the organizers here, and I direct the Translational Science Center on Fostering Independence in Aging. You'll see on people's badges, some will say organizing committee, and the others for the students have some, like a rim around. If you have any questions during the day, you can ask some of the organizers or the students, and hopefully they can help you. I just have a few other important announcements. Please remember to silence your phones. The bathrooms are out past the posters and on either side of the room where the table presentations are. We have breakfast on both sides here, and as well as coffee, and help yourself if you at any time, and also during the break that'll come up later. The slides that have been showing between that you've seen so far and will be up between talks will include one that has internet access information if you need it. Also, I want to point out there are posters on either side of the room. If you look on both sides here, and those are for you to write down any questions you have, any comments you have, or answers during the whole day. Please note that you got a packet when you came in, and in there's also a survey that we'd like you to fill out. And you can use just a regular pen to fill that out at the end of the day or when you're about to leave. Just fill in the bubbles, and you can write any questions on the other side. So also on these slides are our sponsors. Okay, we're very grateful to all of our sponsors, both from outside Wake Forest University and inside. And one of those sponsors is the Office of the President, and relevant to that, it's really my pleasure and honor to introduce the next person coming up here, the President of Wake Forest University, Dr. Nathan Hatch.
Thank you, Danny, and good morning on this wonderful spring day. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this very important symposium on aging. This is a wonderful event because it brings together everything that's happening on Wake Forest's two campuses in wonderful ways. It engages the community, and then it brings some of the top experts from many different fields in the country to bear upon this for an important set of discussions. It's genuinely interdisciplinary, and I think if what I learned in this session yesterday was how it shakes up our thinking, makes us really reconceptualize aging, and I think that's probably the point. We're able to host this event because of the tremendous work of our organizing committee. Let me note them. The two Christinas, Christina Soriano and Christina Hugen-Smith, and also Danny Kim Shapiro. Very thanks to them for their tireless work. But there are also other many sponsors across the university: the Elder Law Clinic, the Wake Forest School of Medicine, the Stick Center for Aging, the Translational Science Center, the Center for Bioethics, Health and Society, the Humanities Institute, and the Interdisciplinary Space. To the many faculty, sponsors, staff, and students involved, thank you for all you've done to make this possible. The Aging Reimagined Symposium highlights some of the best aspects of our academic traditions. Today's discussion will focus on wellness and well-being, service to society, and education of the whole person, all central emphases at Wake Forest. It is my hope that this conference will spark unique contemporary conversations on these important issues that all of us face. To continue with today's events, please help me welcome Kate Mewhinney, Clinical Professor of Law and the Managing Attorney at the Elder Law Clinic. Kate.
Good morning. Are we ready to learn a lot today? Yeah. I noticed there are no back row students here. This is a great crowd. That's very rare. Usually everybody moves to the back of the room. I'm real proud of you. I am welcoming you on behalf of the law school and the Elder Law Clinic. The clinic, as some of you may know, was based for 20 years at the medical center in the Stick Center. So it's great to work with my old friends from the Stick Center. How many people in here have ever bought a house? Had a traffic ticket? Started a business? All right. So you all have interacted with lawyers. And it's not that often that we do, and frankly, probably most of us would just as soon avoid dealing with lawyers when we can. But much about the quality of our lives is, in fact, determined by law and policy. One of the first things that probably comes to your mind is Social Security, the Social Security check that your parent might be living on, that you might be using to support yourself. That is a law that was enacted in the 1930s, and it has had a huge effect on the quality of life of older people. Medicare is another huge program. In fact, the largest health insurance program in the world. It covers 98% of American elders. And it, together with Social Security income, those two programs caused the rate of older people's poverty to drop in the last century from 35% of elders living in poverty to 10%. That is reimagining aging. When the year 2000 rolled around, a lot of states, in fact all states, had passed laws saying, we love all that medical care, but you know what? There are times that we don't want all that medical care when we are approaching death. And so all states passed laws saying, we are reimagining dying to not always be a very high-tech, medicalized event in life. And so they reimagined dying to be a more natural process that, and that was achieved through the law. So law has been a key element of reimagining and reshaping aging in the last century. It has affected income. It has affected medical care. It has affected how we die. Those are just a few of the ways that the law helps us age successfully. Well, we have visionary lawyers today, fortunately, and they're working very hard to shape laws so that the next century will also be better than what we have today. And it's not all about policy and big statutes like the ones I've just spoken about. These are also lawyers who reimagine what it's like to interact with clients. I think of Liz Lerman's comments yesterday about the environment and the context being so important. And so when we work with older clients, these are lawyers who take the extra time that an older client might need. These are lawyers who are used to making home visits. It's part of what we do. These are lawyers who are really unfazed by working with clients who might have a memory limitation or physical challenges. That is the kind of lawyer that is an elder law attorney. And these are lawyers who really value the gentleness and the toughness that come with age. Frank Johns is one of those lawyers. He is truly a fearless advocate for older people. He is a person who has built organizations, and he's also, here in a university setting, he fits wonderfully because he's a lifetime learner and a lifetime teacher. After having been a successful attorney for decades in Greensboro, and while being a successful attorney, he went back to school and got a master's in elder law from Stetson University in Florida. And as if that's not enough, he's now an adjunct faculty member at Stetson Law School, helping teach in their LLM program on elder law. Frank Johns is also an author of many law review articles, which is pretty darn hard to do when you're practicing full-time and running a law practice. And these are not simple pieces. These are very complex, and they're very visionary, and they're really a model of what the practitioner-learner teacher should be. Now, in North Carolina, we have a wonderful bar association based in Cary, the North Carolina Bar Association, that has different sections and interest groups. One of them is the Elder Law and Special Needs section. We have 500 lawyers in that section now. Who started the Elder Law section? Frank Johns. He didn't have anything else to do with his time, so he figured, well, what the heck? Maybe I'll start an organization of elder law attorneys and help raise the standard of practice. And I will get off of my little presentation here to say that the incoming chair is one of my former students who's an attorney down near Charlotte, Natalie Miller, wonderful young lawyer. So proud of her. On a national level, the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys has 5,000 members in all 50 states. You probably didn't know that you may not have known that there was an area of specialty called elder law. So if you're looking for your relative in another state, you should look at the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. Who was one of the presidents of that large organization? Frank Johns. Like many professional organizations, there is a program that recognizes the leaders, and that is a program called the Fellows. Frank Johns is a fellow of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. On a practitioner level, we now have 2 board certifications in the field of elder law, similar to medicine. Law has been a little slower in getting to board certification than medicine. And Frank Johns is also board certified by the North Carolina State Bar as well as the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. And as if that's not enough, really the creme de la creme is what's called an ACTEC Fellow. ACTEC is the American College of Trust and Estate Counsel, ACTEC. They are the blue blood best lawyers in the country. Frank Johns is a fellow of ACTEC. In addition to working with older adults, Frank has worked for many, many years with people with special needs, people with disabilities. He started the National Guardianship Association, which has really raised the standard of practice of people who serve as guardians or decision makers for impaired adults. And on a statewide level, he started a group called the Corporation of Guardianship, which is based in Greensboro, and he and his wife, Ann Johns, I'm not sure if she's here yet. Ann is here. Raise your hand, Ann, so they see you. You should meet with her. Ann has a nursing background, and they provide high-quality care and monitor the care for people with disabilities throughout the state and even in other states. Really, though, Frank's greatest passion, and you want to see him light up, is the litigation that he does. He is a fierce litigator. I've served as a mediator in cases where he is one of the attorneys, and he does not give up. He litigates in federal court. He litigates, which is a whole nother world. Trust me. He litigates in state court. He handles what's called fiduciary wrongdoing, which sadly enough is a growing area where the trusted person, lawyer, family member, business person, takes advantage of an elder. That's called fiduciary wrongdoing. Frank handles those cases, elder abuse, and a very wide range of matters that affect older people and people with disabilities. So I'm so proud and so pleased to welcome Frank Johns. Please welcome him as well.
I'm tired. Thank you to President Hatch. Thank you to Danny and the Christinas in the committee for what all of us have already begun to experience. An experience of relationship, an experience of exchange, an experience of discussion. Hopefully it will continue and it will drive the conversation, broadening our perspectives and our boundaries. It's been said often since yesterday afternoon that it's just too infrequent that there's any dialogue at all between us being those in the various disciplines and professions serving the people that we care about. There are many takeaways from what Liz and Jay shared with us yesterday afternoon. I say Liz and Jay not out of respect, but she won't put a front-end word on her name like professor or doctor or what have you. It's just Liz Lehrman. So no disrespect to Dr. Shansky. One thing they said at the end of each of their presentations was they didn't have enough time to share with you all of what they wanted to say. I have more to say than you have time to hear. I have more to say than you know, but then you probably know most of it already. The idea of how law and policy affects change and affects the impact on older persons, old people, elders. I mean, what is the word you use, Louise, that's not ageism? And one thing that Liz mentioned was there were times when she was too busy to be bothered by those who were interfering with what she had to do, like the lady who walked up and said, "You're the reason for my back injury." Remember? One comment, and I'll get back to that point. Charlie Sabatino, the executive director of the American Bar Association Commission on Law and Aging, was supposed to be standing before you and delivering. Charlie had a pretty horrible cycling accident on Christmas Day. He spent and is spending months recovering. Kate Mewhinney and I have known each other for decades. We are close and dear friends. And Kate called me and asked if I could substitute. I said, I'll check my calendar, and I'm here. What I didn't see until after I said yes was the lineup. How in the world do I share anything with you that's meaningful that comes after Liz Lehrman and Jay Shansky? It brought to mind the lyrics of John Fogerty, once of Creedence Clearwater Revival, who wrote, an album in 1985 called Centerpiece, and the refrain is, "Send me in, coach, I'm ready to play." I may be the last person sitting on the bench, but I'm really glad to be here. And I was so awed last night at a dinner with speakers. And I let them know that I was sitting there letting the passion and the brilliance of those around me waft through the room. And I made a note to share with Christina that at the next one, we really need a town hall framework where that dialogue that I got to hear, that you should have heard, can be shared in a way that it resonates, because as one person said something, another jumped in, and it was just incredible. But I don't have enough time. The focus here is in 4 quadrants, 4 areas, 4 elements that sustain or hold up life. You read it. Mobility, mind and memory, mortality, and meaning. My responsibility for you this morning, and hopefully beyond this morning, because I've written a significant amount of information, more than you can hear, and I will make sure it's uploaded so that you might have access to my meandering thoughts about all of the mediums that impact on these 4 areas of function. But first, the foundation of it all is a broad landscape of aging. And I broke this out into 2 main areas. The area that looks at aging examined in diverse mediums. And then I look at aging examined within the context of research and critical thinking. Now, if research and critical thinking has its place in the practice of law or in the profession, it's a very different context and a very different defined area than what you are working in as researchers, as scientists, as truly academic. So that's not my strength, but I direct you in footnotes to some history of those publications that impact on all of us, and in time so affect law and policy that law and policy is changed. And I think part of the proposition here is that sometimes it's more what you do to affect law and policy than what law and policy does to affect these 4 areas of function. So in the world of those diverse mediums, I thought I would just pick 1 or 2 things and mention them to you. And as I started looking, I got lost. If it wasn't books, it was music. If it wasn't music, it was dance, movement. If it wasn't dance and movement, it was poetry. If it wasn't poetry, it was movies. If it wasn't movies, it was television series, and even more. Ceramics and tapestry, sculpture, architecture. These mediums have so much to say to all of us about aging and old age. I could go for the next 25 or 30 minutes walking through the list that I composed in these areas. And isn't the internet astounding? I mean, at your fingertips, you can find every list there is about old age and aging, about any of these mediums. And then as you look at some that you never thought you would consider, you're caught. Have you ever heard deaf poetry? It's the rapper's way of expressing, and it is astounding. Some years ago, Bill Moyers did The Language of Life, a series on PBS. And those writings and what is shown in the mediums about how we experience life is just astounding. Let me give you one that you might not have heard of if you're of a generation like mine. Sefton Stevens. He is a new artist, although he's been around for 8, 9, 10 years. He is a softer melody, a calming lyricist. You will enjoy listening to him if you take the time. Recently, he had an experience in his life where members had tragic situations and died. And Sefton Stevens wrote Carrie and Lowell. That's the name of the album. The first song, Death with Dignity. Powerful expression. When the artists are involved in something close to home, they turn it around in expressions that help us understand where they are, where we are. Many of you may know who David Bowie is, or Bowie, the rock artist of the 70s. He died in January. As he was dying, he finished one last album titled Black Star. Google it. Listen to it. Listen to the song Lazarus. Haunting in the depths of despair, knowing that his death was imminent. On a lighter note, Liz mentioned the soon-to-be 170-year-old who danced with President Obama in January, and it electrified. It was trending. It was something. Google this one. Sarah Patty Jones. She's an 80-year-old. And she was on Britain's Got Talent. She did acrobatic, choreographed dancing, the likes of which will drop your jaw. Liz mentioned, you know, I wasn't invited to the Roosevelt Hotel. I just showed up and went in. And all of this for us is to say that we limit ourselves, as our speakers have said, to the boundaries that confine us and literally imprison our imagining something different. And so back to the point of being distracted or bothered. In the shuttle that was bringing me here this morning, David just had to talk to me. But I was so consumed with thinking about what I was going to say to you. And my thought was, is there a polite way I can shut you up? And I mentioned to David why I'm here and what I do. And David said, well, you know, I was at the dentist the other day. I was getting a crown. I was sitting in the chair, and the hygienist was pleasant enough, and she was talking to me. And then she said, how old are you? I love talking to old people. Ageism in your face. And then he said, people age, and then nobody thinks about them. He said, that lady was so thoughtful, and she really meant it. And I said, yeah, if you were a black person sitting in that chair, and they said, I really love talking to black people, we would have known instantly, and I may be taking some thunder from Dr. Aronson, because ageism is so subtle. So to put the word old in front of the person, to put the word that defines where they are as old, to define the person, is something that we in our professions actually do all the time. And let me say that in consultations with clients, and there's more than just the elders sitting in the room, the children and the others in the room are downright hurtful with the way in which they address the elders, identify the elders, talk about the elders. So we have a long way to go in dealing with the sensitivities. Let's move to the next part of my talk. So framing each of the four sections, initially I was only looking at the negative side of it. So when you don't have mobility, then what? And how does law and policy affect that? But the truth of the matter is, it is a broader context. Mobility, the way I looked at it in the end, was to first look at mobility in the context of the individual, him or herself. There's no doubt but that for any one of these four areas, what I'm about to say fits. And that is, if this area is not sustained, independence, autonomy, and freedom, self-esteem and self-worth are diminished and can be lost. So it had me thinking about what I do as an elder law attorney, and I share with you in my comments, and I'm not going to tell you here, that it is defined by 14 areas of law. One of the most important components is the fact that we are not just attorneys, but we are attorneys and counselors. And in the initial conference and the initial meeting with clients, it becomes critical to listen and to understand who you're talking to and what you're talking about. And I divide it in two pieces. One is to examine the quality of their lives, and then I merge that into an examination of the stewardship of their legacy. So when I'm moving through quality of life, I ask about, well, how are you doing? What's your health? Medications? What issues confront you? Sometimes they say that they take few medications, they're healthy as an ox, they don't feel old at all. And all of them relish the compliment. You know, you don't look a day over 50. I often have a comeback with a question, and I ask, well, can you define old age with one word? And they look like some of you are looking, somewhat hesitant and quizzical, until they hear the answer. Health. Health is everything, and it probably creates an age beyond middle age called late age, but before old age. When you have your age, you live behind a mask of virtual reality. You see as a youth. You see as someone who can still do everything they ever did. And then I noted, until you walk by a mirror. And Dr. Orshansky and his face my age idea. If you Google Jay Orshansky, you'll see that he and a cohort created this face my age where you take a selfie and then you look at what you find. And I had already written my piece about how we don't really see ourselves that way. We're talking about mobility, and last week I was waiting in line to board a plane for Tucson, Arizona. There was a late age couple standing close by me. And as and I write patiently, and those who know me know that that's not a word really associated with me and my personality and character. I struggle for the virtue of patience. I have yet to get there. So we stood there and we watched as stewards moved people in wheelchairs across the gateway or the threshold into the gateway. And she said it loud enough for me to hear. I will hate being like that again. Thank God that's not me anymore. It was an obvious public admission of the fear of human immobility. It summarizes the number connected to age. And it's not where fear lies, but instead it's the consequences and the possible loss of such vitality that unnerves us. Losing physical function. Whether it's sitting or standing, transitioning, walking a few steps or up steps, walking around inside or outside the house, longer assisted walks or unassisted walks, being in the neighborhood, hiking, dancing, running, cycling, driving. Mobility beyond the individual is to focus on community. And it raises not just the law that applies, but many questions about how. How do we obtain various forms of therapies to sustain mobility? Are there any movements, I'm looking for Christina, in the world that would force us to provide for recreational therapy, dance therapy, Tai Chi, yoga, those things that go beyond conventional third-party funded therapies? How do people actually obtain artificial limbs? Walkers, lifts, scooters, or vans. Sadly, those that are third-party funded, you see them in the ads because there's profit to be made. But for those things that are not third-party funded, for those things that may require individual expense, most of our older population, they don't have the money for it. Law and policy affecting and focusing on mobility include transportation. Part of that connection is the idea that obesity is connected to health, which is connected to mobility. I don't know if in Winston-Salem or in your community it's happening, but there's a great fund of revenue available now for greenways. So all of a sudden, there they are. Americans with Disability Acts insisted that there be not only sidewalks, but the sidewalks be accessible for people with disabilities, creating ways by which we have mobility in community. Consider mobility a little bit differently. The Older Americans Act, many of you are involved with its money, and many of you are involved with the delivery of what it offers community. All you have to think of is mobile meals, Meals on Wheels, senior centers. I was supposed to be at a fundraiser for our senior resource organization last night, and I didn't make it. But I had to be at the annual luncheon on Tuesday. I'm president of that organization for the moment, and I had the duty of being MC, and this has been going on for 20 years, and I've been there for every year, and the routine and the rituals seem to be somewhat similar, so I didn't think much of it until the three people who were asked to speak about what they did with mobile meals spoke. Donovan Coleman is 12 years old. He's not defined by his color or his age. He stood before us and he read prose and delivered it. Wow. He talked about how his grandparents insisted that he go help deliver mobile meals. And he didn't want to do it. And then while he was doing it, he experienced an epiphany. He found that these people were wonderful and that his faith was renewed and that he received much more than what they gave. And then the Martins stood up, a couple in their 80s, and they acknowledged how they have been on mobile meals teams for years and years. And they shared how they were at the door of one person who didn't answer. And the story goes on where that person had been lying on the floor for over 24 hours. They wouldn't stop screaming for people to help. Help came in time. The person was saved. And then there was the stewardess for American Airlines who is trying to take care of her 97-year-old father, and things are unraveling for her because she described being caught in airports, not being able to get home to him, and how the support and the commitment of those who delivered mobile meals was so much more than the meal itself. It's connection, it's access, it's voice, it's relationship, the likes of which our laws don't even know, and we often don't realize at all. The law and policy adapting to mind and memory. So here too I was thinking more narrow when I should have been broader. And as I thought about it, I actually thought in terms of how we focus on enhancing the mind. And we also think about how the mind declines in function. There are any number of mediums that tell us about the future of mind enhancement. Just drop this pill and you'll be so brilliant. And in 1968, it was the movie Charlie. The story of this mildly mentally disabled individual who was given an experiment and he became beyond genius. It was later a second iteration in Flowers for Algernon around 2000. And then there was a book, and now there's a TV series called Limitless. I was caught watching it. I didn't intend to watch it, and now I make sure I know when it's on, because all he does is drop a pill and he's just beyond brilliance. The piece that ties Charlie, Flowers for Algernon, and Limitless together is that there's a consequence, more artfully and scientifically expressed by Dr. Shansky, or Shansky, excuse me. And that is, too much of a good thing will kill you. And in the end, these people will suffer a fast demise. So wherever research is heading in terms of enhancing the mind, there's a lot going on. There's a lot we have yet to learn. We're learning a lot more about declining function in the mind. Dr. Olshansky also mentioned that he was somewhat critical of the fact that there's so much funding for research. I was president of the North Carolina chapter of Alzheimer's Association, and one of the tensions even back then, and it continues now, is the fact that the National Alzheimer's Association is dedicated to research. They want to end Alzheimer's in our lifetimes. And yet some of us were arguing that there really needs to be some of that funding for the families and for others who give support and caregiving because of the devastation that it has on the lives of not just the victim, but everybody around them and associated with them. So the idea in terms of law and policy affecting is to consider research versus caregiving and support. And quite frankly, in today's political climate, we know that the latter will not be funded. Senator Jesse Helms. North Carolinians surely remember Senator Helms. Around 1983 or 84, I was advocating the rights of a severely autistic child. He was one who was violent and would bang his head 2,000 or 3,000 times a day. And his parents were so excited because Senator Jesse Helms was going to take up their cause. And sure enough, he did. But it wasn't for what they needed. He made sure that there was a bill introduced for funding research into what causes autism. There's plenty of money for that. There's so little money for advocacy and support. Consider, too, in terms of mobility, the ideas of aging at home and dying with quality of life versus being in a restrictive institutional setting. Is it safety or is it convenience? More about that in a minute. Alternative care plans that will include dancing and music and social stimulation. Well, we've got anecdotal and empirical evidence from our other speakers that say to us clearly, it works. What are you waiting for? We're going to see a movie. The movie simply shows how music that you love that comes from your generation will wake you up. It's a stimulation that's obviously connected to long-term memory, and it brings you back to the present. Patients' rights acts and others acts that affect all of these. And then the turn of advocacy and support to what is called person-centered philosophy and supported decision-making, principles and experience that really comes from 50 years of dedicated work in the world of disabilities, where researchers and advocates can share with us in the world of aging so much about those principles. Moving on to adapting to mortality. Dr. Olshansky certainly shared the numbers. I was just Googling. We're gonna have average age of 80 just within the next 15 or 20 years. We're going to have an average age of 100. Average age of 100 by the 2050s for women and 2080s for men. And Dr. Olshansky talked about how we will be able to slow down. He called it, didn't he call it, the longevity dividend? I've got one question. Where are we going to put all these people? And what about all the births coming? But that's for another conference. Mortality. Go for a minute back to 1990. Her name was Mary Carides. Mary was tough as nails. She was always tough as nails. Alone with no family, Mary immigrated at the age of 17 from Constantinople. No one was waiting when she arrived in America. She ended up in Greensboro. How in the world? But she did. For her whole life, working well into her 80s, she built up a business. She ran what we once called flop houses in the area of Greensboro that used to be called Hamburger Square, where you don't go there alone at night. Mary was in trouble, and I just happened to become her advocate. Even then, she did well, and we helped her age in place at home. But decline took her hearing, her vision, her mobility. It forced her into a nursing home. But Mary never lost her memory. She knew exactly what was going on, and time and again she would just angrily yell at me, "Why do you have me in jail? And why can't you fix my eyes? And why can't you fix it so I can walk?" much like Jay and Liz did. I'm running out of time, but let me suggest the idea of losing your mind or losing your health brought me to thinking about the Robert Frost poem, Fire and Ice. He contemplates, when the world ends, what would be your preference, to perish in fire or to perish in ice? In our society today, I suggest for individuals, it's how would you like to die? Losing your body or losing your memory? Losing your body, you're conscious and aware of your decline in your end. Losing your memory, it's those around you who have lost you but cannot grieve. There's more to say about the other end of mortality. I suggest the cases of Karen Quinlan, Nancy Cruzan, and Terry Schiavo. Many of you know those names because they drove the demand for us to deal with end-of-life issues. And I suggest to you that there is so much more in the world of meaning, the idea of relationships, the fact that the LGBTQ community is only just moving beyond the real discrimination. They will still live with the undercurrent of it. And like many of you, I honestly couldn't tell you what Q stands for. But the footnote says, one of the head of disability rights says it's all right to use queer and it's all right to use different, but it's an alternative where you're not sure who you are and what you are yet. Dealing with these relationships, dealing with how we have meaning is critical to the components that organize mobility, mind and memory, and mortality. I'll leave you with this. It was just Wednesday, and I was so worried about what in the world am I going to say to you? But I had to see these clients. They said it was an emergency. They needed to redo their wills, and one of them was coming here to Baptist Hospital for major surgery. And as I sat with them, they shared with me what they were going through. Two quick things. One, the fact that this subgroup of a department of neurology at the hospital was so welcoming. He said, I went over to UNC Memorial, and when I went over to Baptist, the one word that made the difference was joy. They were wonderful. They spent more time with me than I knew they had to give. It was exceptional, Frank. And they changed the name of this subclinic to movement disorders. And that's so meaningful to me because I have Parkinson's, and I just feel like when you have Parkinson's, there is so much discrimination because you can see my dysfunction. And as he stood to leave, the chair rolled out too fast. He fell. He hit his head on the cushion of the chair. He lay on the floor of our conference room for a minute, his spouse and I helping him to make sure there wasn't anything hurt. to regain his composure. Now, the idea of making your office work for the people you serve is important. And so our office, we've been through all of it. And one thing they said is, well, if you have a carpeted conference room, put rollers on the chairs so they can be able to move away from the table. And Dr. Aronson is knowingly shaking her head. I learned, and hopefully not at his expense, meaning we all have something to give that brings meaning to the lives of others. And more than anything else, if we do that, they're going to give meaning for us. We who teach know that we've done well when we have learned more from the students than they have learned from us. Thank you for your time.
So we have a few minutes. We have a few minutes for some questions, and unless I see a question, I have a question to ask Frank. One of the things that's been discussed in the elder law community is broadening the scope of Medicare to cover long-term care, because the way it stands now, there's very little coverage of nursing home care by Medicare, and until a person essentially impoverishes themselves, Medicaid will not cover their care. So a lot of families are facing financial disaster when one member or they themselves go into a long-term care facility for a long time. Can you bring us up to date on what work has been done on a national level to bring the issue of long-term care coverage to the fore, and are we making any progress?
No. We know, many of us know, that Senator Ted Kennedy was dedicated to better health care. And he had the Class Act that he was trying to move through Congress at the time that he died. They, in fact, put the Class Act into the Affordable Care Act. And we all thought, well, we're backing into universal coverage. It won't be Medicare and Medicaid. It'll be all one. And then as President Obama and his administration found out, the price tag in the trillions was something they couldn't even begin to touch, and they just said it would not be funded. What is getting funded? Well, you know, there is funding if you want to buy long-term care insurance, because the insurance industry has done well to make its voice heard in Congress to design ways by which you can get third-party payment for long-term benefits if you pay for it yourself. Where are we? Well, part of my comments was that it takes a firestorm of public outrage to create the changes in law that we need. One quick example was 1987, when the AP published its expose on guardianship. One of the titles was America's Gulag, Guardianships. And the firestorm that came from it, the former Congressman of Florida, Claude Pepper, held hearings. They brought in the individual stories that make the difference to say what was going on in guardianship. We've had similar stories about what's going on in our nursing homes. You know, and you know the difference between the for-profit nursing homes and the for-profit nursing homes. But that firestorm is just a grassroots campfire.
Oh, good. We've got one question.
Oh, you came right in my area of my next question, guardianship. And if you would put on your fiduciary abuse hat, tying those two together, are you seeing anywhere across the state or the country any flare-ups of fiduciary abuse under guardianship, as we've just seen in the newspapers here in Forsyth County?
In at least 10 metropolitan areas across our country, there have been investigative journalists publishing series about the dark side of guardianship. You can Google the anti-guardianship groups, and they are flat out radical, and their rage is at times well taken. But the problem with that is it's not going to fix what is inherently wrong with the so-called guardianship system. One of the complexities is guardianship is a common law-driven function. Therefore, it's not something that's done at a federal level. Each and every of the 50 states and territories have their own guardianship laws, and many of them are archaic and difficult. They do not deliver procedural due process. Can you imagine if this were in a criminal setting and the taking away of rights without due process? Here, people's individual rights are completely stripped from them, and the hearings are informal and very often done by judges and clerks who aren't even licensed to practice law. It's a difficult world. There is a lot going on to change it, and I currently chair the National Guardianship Network. And the American Bar Association, through its Uniform Laws Commission, we're right now rewriting the Uniform Guardianship and Protective Proceedings Act. But that difficulty is, I'm sorry, but it's going to get worse.
We got another question over. Yes, right here.
Long-term care insurance, serious issue, I think. It's an obvious opportunity for people as they are, say, in their late 50s. The problem is that the premiums for that, by the time people may be approaching the time they're most likely to need it, have a tendency to increase sharply. The state's addressing that issue?
No. And Dr. Olshansky made clear why. It's the fact that the long-term care insurance companies didn't figure their life expectancy tables correctly, and the time in which people remain in assisted living and skilled nursing environments are bankrupting them. So they've got to up their premiums. And most of the people who need it neither have the money or the wherewithal to get it, and by that point in time they wouldn't qualify anyway. It's a terribly difficult dilemma. Thank you for mentioning it.
I have a question. Is it on? About the American Disabilities Act of 1990.
Yes,
how are lawsuits brought against us who are aging? Okay, how does that law affect us, I guess is what I want to ask.
That's a very good question. So you remember the 1,000 candles of light? You know, at that time, George H.W. Bush was considered a conservative. Well, there have many attempts to reduce, if not repeal, the ADA. And the reason is because there are more and more people affected who come within the definition of what is defined disability. How older people advocate and litigate their rights under the ADA is somewhat complicated, because in the different titles of the ADA, they design very detailed ways by which you have a right to be in court to be heard. And so if you don't meet some of the specific elements connected to federal agencies who deliver services, or to those entities that come under the ADA mandate, then you don't have a right to be heard. So getting there is one thing. Even if you get to court, the litigation that ensues becomes oppressively expensive and time-consuming. So you need to orchestrate the organization of classes who have been harmed in order that your voice in that courtroom will not be drowned out by the dozens of lawyers sitting at the other table.
If we don't have another question, thank you, Frank Johns, so much for coming and helping us.